In All Possible Futures, the most recent exhibition curated by John Sueda, a parallel universe of graphic design practice is mapped out, in which graphic designers create work intended to explore the potential of high and low technologies, engage in critical conversations about the field, blur the boundaries between disciplines, and ultimately create work without a client. None of this behavior in and of itself is new or particularly groundbreaking, and in fact, what John might be documenting is the normalization of this particular type of work, the myriad and fluid ways that graphic designers switch and combine registers, working on client-based projects one day, creating their own work at night, or frequently fusing the two until they're one and the same. The exhibition asks, what is the critical potential in a discipline that feels intent on transcending itself? Though he has curated numerous exhibitions about design, John is at heart a practicing designer, dedicated to the craft of creating meaning and framing content. Originally from Hawaii, John's studio Stripe SF is located in San Francisco, creating work for clients such as Chronicle Books, the New York Times Magazine, and the Architecture Association in London. John also served as director of design for the CCA Wadis Institute for Contemporary Arts for 7 years, creating all of their exhibition graphics, catalogs, and branding. He is the art director of Exhibitionist Magazine, a journal by curators for curators, and a co-organizer of At Random Events, a community-sponsored public gathering of designers, artists, writers, and researchers within the LA area. And on top of all of that, John is currently the chair of the MFA design program at the California College of Arts, which he'll talk about tonight. He has lectured and taught at colleges around the world, and his work has been featured in numerous publications. His work has also been featured in exhibitions in Paris, Brno, New York, and he has taught at schools all over the world as well. Most recently, he was named a member of the jury of the 27th International Graphic Design Biennial in Brno, so he is very busy. Tonight, John is going to talk about the intersection of all of these worlds, and I'm super excited to have him here, so please help me in welcoming John Sueda.
Hi, everybody. Is the mic working? Okay. So thanks, Emmett, for such a nice introduction, and thanks to the Walker and AIGA Minnesota for sponsoring this event, and thanks all of you guys for coming out on a really rainy night. It's super good to be here. I'm a huge fan of this lecture series. Before I had kids, I never missed an Insights lecture series, and over the years, I've really learned a lot from the things you put on here at the Walker. I'm especially happy to be here too because Brian Rodinger was here last week, and we actually went to school together 16 years ago. We overlapped a couple years at CalArts, so it's really great to sort of intersect with him all these years later. So today I'm going to talk about worlds, the worlds that I participate in my practice as a graphic designer, which I suspect are the same worlds that you guys all participate in as well. So, but first I'm gonna, since I obviously stole this title from somewhere, I'm gonna expand and sort of contextualize what this title could mean in a broader context. So for all the sci-fi experts in the room, they might know When Worlds Collide was actually a 1951 American Technicolor science fiction film from Paramount Pictures directed by Rudolph Mattei, and it's based on a 1933 science fiction novel of the same name. So Worlds Collide is actually about the imminent destruction of Earth by a rogue star called Belus that's basically like on its way to Earth, and it's going to destroy everything. And humankind is trying to create a little space ark that will save and transport a small portion of humanity onto the star's single orbiting planet called Zira. I'm sure that was information that you really wanted to know tonight. So as you see in this poster, there's this little ship that like just takes off as this giant star collides into Earth, and humankind survives. In the 118th episode of the NBC sitcom Seinfeld, which aired first in 1995, Jerry comes up with the bright idea that Elaine should invite George's then-girlfriend, Susan Ross, to a movie with their group of friends. As Elaine leaves, Kramer explains to Jerry how inviting Susan into George's circle of friends will cause his worlds to collide, causing his worlds to blow up. George finds out about this and is really upset. He later catches Jerry sharing a meal with Elaine, Tom, and Susan, and at their local hangout, Tom's Restaurant. And George is forced to seek out new worlds at a nearby diner called Reggie's. So, basically when your worlds collide, this seems like a big disaster. It doesn't seem like a good idea. In a graphic design context, this idea of worlds first came to me as a graduate student at CalArts in the early 2000s, where my teacher, Ed Fella, here speaking at the Insights lecture in 2008, constantly talked about his life as a commercial artist in Detroit in the 60s and 70s, doing automobile and healthcare brochures by day, and by night making these strange experimental tabloid-sized flyers for the Detroit Focus Gallery at night and on the weekends. So early in his career, he clearly drew the line between these two parallel worlds, the work he did for a living and the work he did for love. On the right is Dutch design studio Experimental Jet Set, here speaking at the Walker in 2009, who fielded a question in the Q&A session after their lecture about what they did to satisfy the need to create work that didn't have a client. The person in the audience called it personal work. And Experimental Jet Set responded by saying they saw every project as personal and self-initiated, even when there's a client involved. Elaborating on that, they said it would be very dangerous to save all their real creative energy for the work they did in the weekends and just politely satisfy their clients. They made the example of a director like Hitchcock producing really mainstream blockbuster movies for the studios and then doing weird arty films in his basement on the weekends. So, being a CalArts graduate, I really romanticized this narrative that Ed talked about, and the idea of having a commercial practice and a personal one. And for most of my early career, I think that's what I was actually striving for. And it sounds really naive now, but this notion of collapsing all my creative energy into one space kind of really blew my mind when I watched that Jet Set lecture a few years back, and it's really sort of shaped the way I think about my practice since. So these are my worlds, which over time have come to revolve around three main activities: a pretty traditional client-based practice, a body of self-generated work, and design education. I've been teaching in some capacity for about 13 years now. So initially, when I started my studio in 2004, these activities were really different and sort of intentionally separate in a lot of ways. The work I did for clients was nothing like the work I really wanted to do, and had nothing to do with the things I was teaching. So after years of developing my practice, these areas have really pretty much converged, and they're kind of hard to pull apart, and they all seem to inform one another and almost exist as like a large moving blob. So if I actually knew how to use Keynote better, these things would probably be moving a little bit, and they almost would turn into like a single circle, and then they move apart again, but I don't really know how to do anything like that, so you'll just have to imagine. So tonight I'm going to try to unpack these worlds and hopefully show the relationships and in fact a sort of interdependency between the worlds. So I'll start by talking about my work for clients. So actually, I run a really small studio called Stripe that Emmett mentioned. It's actually a really small studio. It's in a shed in my backyard. And I have recently finished a 7-year stint as the CCA Wadis Institute Contemporary Arts Director of Design. And I actually moved to LA, moved from LA to the Bay Area in 2007, invited by the new Wadis director at the time, Jens Hoffman, to completely redesign the gallery identity and serve as the in-house designer responsible for creating all the material for the gallery. So the scope of the work I did there was quite specific. I designed exhibition identities, signage, invitations, booklets, catalogs, and sometimes artist editions and books. And so I'm going to show you a sort of broad snapshot of the kind of work I did at the Wadis and maybe point out some key characteristics of my work. So here's a sample of various invitation cards that I did over the years. I think a key shift in my work happened at the Wadis. Jens never wanted to use artist imagery to lead shows, which in the museum art institution world is quite unusual. In most cases, there's always like a huge argument about which image is going to be on all the banners and posters and everything like that. And he kind of completely sidestepped that. But as a designer, that kind of removed one part of your arsenal as a designer, like removing imagery. What do you do? So it really sort of forced me to focus on typography and the material qualities of printed matter. So in all my work, I really place emphasis on the sort of physical aspects of graphic design and like to emphasize materials, printing techniques, and the object quality of the work to create a context-specific form for each piece. So these are some catalogs from different exhibitions I did at the Wadis. Maybe another key characteristic to my work is a sense of immediacy. I deliberately try not to overwork things, and it's become a lot easier now that I have 2 kids. Like, I just don't have time to get fussy over anything. I really believe in sort of working quickly, being spontaneous, and coming up with conceptual restrictions and systems and to sort of that help me sort of dictate the form of the work. So although I worked on a lot of exhibition identities and catalogs before I started working with the Wadis, the exhibition space itself was something I had very little experience with. Before, most arts institutions I worked with just wanted a big title graphic and some little wall text underneath at the entrance, and that was it. But in contrast, the Wadis graphic design at times played a really substantial role in creating a supporting visual narrative and atmosphere for the exhibition itself. So this is a show called Blockbuster that actually wasn't at the Wadis, but it was a show that Jens and I did during that period. I think this approach is really unique. I believe it's because Jens didn't come from a traditional art history or curatorial studies background. Before he entered the world of contemporary art, he actually was a theater director. So along with the traditional responsibilities of a curator, he was really interested in the theatrical staging of the exhibition. So he and I would work really closely together to create these sort of exhibition atmospheres for the work to be housed in. So these are just more examples of exhibition graphics that we sort of created together over the years. Maybe another thing that was really special, that is really special with the partnership we have that's quite uncommon, is that in my experience in the past, most curators wanted to sort of rotate designers all the time. And when I worked in LA, there were about 5 designers who would sort of rotate, speed date different curators and stuff like that. And maybe only a few organizations in the US, including the Walker, have like a consistent team that works with a group of curators. And I think that's working with someone consistently over 8 years, you really develop a body of work together and trust, and it sort of enables you to experiment a lot more and take more chances, I think. So I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about a few projects. So in 2007, I received the assignment from the Wadis to design the materials for an exhibition Trilogy that used classic American novels as a point of departure. The first was The Wizard of Oz in 2008. The second was Moby Dick in 2009, which I'm going to talk about now, and Huckleberry Finn in 2010. All these exhibitions use these novels as entry points to examine the relationship between these classic narratives and contemporary art. In designing these 3 books as a set, Jens and I agreed that we should use a first edition printing of each book as a starting point for the design of the catalog. So, in fact, each catalog is the exact size of the original first edition and honors its sort of classical typographic structures and materials of the original printings. So when I did this series, I really kind of approach it like maybe a director might approach remaking a really, really iconic film. So I really feel a responsibility to sort of preserve some parts of the original language of the book, or even the narrative in a way. So here's the first edition printing of Moby Dick that we used as a reference point. So Jens fell instantly in love with this Moby Dick title treatment that was on the cover and insisted that we use it as a logotype for the exhibition. This is really different from The Wizard of Oz, where I sort of customized a new logotype that was sort of inspired by the first edition. And at first, this seemed like a really unattractive decision because I wanted to design something new. But after thinking about it more, I thought it would be really interesting to create a full typeface based on those 8 original characters in the title Moby Dick. And so this is a typeface I designed called Bowline Sans. And I used it throughout the exhibition and the book and feel like it really successfully preserves and evolves the original character of Moby Dick. And pays homage to that original printing. So here's some of the words set in bowline for the exhibition. The blue characters are the original letters from Moby Dick. So to create an exhibition environment that reflected this epic voyage of a whaling ship, Jens decided to paint the entire gallery deep blue and asked me to create these little character wall texts placed throughout the exhibition to really blur the boundaries between the artwork and the novel. So we work really closely together again to sort of create this exhibition experience, and oftentimes the book and the exhibition are really graphically tied tightly together that it works as a really nice sort of set all together. So here's the catalog, and one of the continuing ideas that we aimed for throughout the 3 exhibition was to allow the catalog to remain a bit ambiguous. At first glance, we wanted someone to pick it up and not be sure if they were looking at a new printing of the original novel, or only after looking at it closely you'd realize it was an art catalog. So here's a few inside spreads showing you what the book looked like. So this is a more recent exhibition called the United States of Latin America that I just finished with Jens that was exhibited in Mocad in Detroit. And this show brings together more than 30 emerging artists from Latin America, many who were exhibited for the first time in the States for this exhibition. And the narrative of this show revolves around themes like geography, history, urbanism, memory, and regionalism and power. And the curators aim to give the viewer a glimpse into the reality that might seem geographically really near, but in many ways is sort of unfamiliar or far away. The exhibition Identity was inspired and kind of a commentary on the biographies of many of the artists in the show. A lot of times you'll read they were born in Peru, or they were born in a country, but they like work in all these other countries, or not even in Latin America anymore. And I thought it was quite blurry, this idea of nationality, and I thought it would be interesting to sort of work that blurriness into the exhibition Identity itself. So what I did was kind of analyze all the Latin American flags and kind of distill the graphics. So the top left are the Latin American flags. On the right, I kind of distilled all the colors and got rid of all the little details and little illustrations. On the bottom left, I further distilled it down to sort of tonal values and kind of separated the different overlays and stars and things like that, and the color palette, and also created a typographic layer that might have become part of the identity. And then I basically created a flag generator that would sort of randomly mix these things together in different combinations to generate a whole series of new flags. So this is a sort of example of some of the flags generated from this process. These are the object labels where each artist got like a fragment of the flag from the country of their birth. And this is the catalog, which the cover actually kind of looks like a bit like a map of a Latin American landscape. And as you open up the the cover, it reveals all the different flags. The book construction inside, it sort of echoes this flag strategy, this idea of recombining different formal elements of nationality. We have 5 different colored papers from the original flag color palettes, and it's bound together with this tape binding, kind of further emphasizing this idea of a collection of nationalities sort of forced together or recombined. And here's the poster that I designed for the exhibition. This is actually a fake poster because nobody ever asked me to design posters anymore, so I just designed them for myself and hang them in my office. Okay, self-generated projects. So as you can see, I've been kind of immersed in the world of exhibitions for quite some time, working with artists and institutions and curators. And actually my first exhibition that I organized was a project I initiated at CalArts when I was a student in the year 2000 with my classmate Stuart Smith about the history of type design at CalArts. I started working at this September, October that I got to school and collected work. We actually commissioned new work from alums. We actually just studied the school's archive for about a year and visualized the exhibition the fall of our second year. So this is just the image, a really horrible old image of these super graphics that we projected on the wall of the main hall at CalArts and sort of had all of our classmates like paint them in different colors. So just kind of showing the history of different typefaces throughout 15 years at CalArts. So I followed up this interest in exhibitions after graduating by organizing this small series of events at storefronts and art centers in Los Angeles. Many of these took the forms of exhibitions, but I sort of hesitate to describe them that way now. At the time, I really had no intention of wanting to curate shows or anything like that, but thought of them more as conversation spaces. I really just missed talking to people about design to sort of annoying levels, the kind of way you do when you're a student. And I wanted to sort of recreate that atmosphere outside of school. So this is an image of a public event series that I created in 2006 with my studio mate Sean Donahue called At Random. And At Random was basically a community gathering of designers, artists, and writers and researchers in Los Angeles. And we were hoping these events would sort of provide a forum for the local design community to sort of take part in a critical discussion about design and get together occasionally to look at new work or talk about different subjects. So on the top there is an exhibition that we organized for a Dutch designer, Harmen Limburg, in 2006. He was displaying these black sort of paper silhouette cutouts that he was using to create his silkscreen prints at the time. At the bottom is another exhibition we organized for an architect named Elena Manfredini, who was creating, sort of working, had this transdisciplinary practice working in fashion and sportswear using a lot of architectural techniques on her pieces. One of the most important aspects of At Random was that it was only 3 hours long. So this limitation was really productive for us. We had no budget for fancy installation, and we simply had to use the most economical means for everything. So this was another exhibition we did for another Dutch designer named Richard Neeson at the William Stout Annex on Mission Street in San Francisco, where we decided to post these posters that in Holland would be seen on the street and sort of put them in the street in San Francisco, something you would never see in San Francisco, cool posters like while you were walking around the Mission District. And this is the last At Random project I'll talk about. It was titled Public Libraries, and it was probably the first event we generated completely ourselves that wasn't based on someone visiting from out of town or a guest speaker. And the exhibition was inspired by the past historic building that we had our events in, which was Eagle Rock Art Center that was formerly Eagle Rock Library. So for one night, we wanted to turn the venue back into a library. So this exhibition idea was very simple. We contacted a lot of designers we liked and respected and asked them if we could borrow about 5 books from their personal libraries that was currently inspiring or influencing their work. So here's a sort of close-up of some of the books people contributed. So we didn't want people to give us books that they designed, but just books that they were really looking into and sort of reading at the time. So there were 105 books that we numbered with these little bookmarks. Part of the event was a bit theatrical, which is mainly for our own entertainment. We wanted the space to have like a very library atmosphere. So we had signage telling people to be very, very quiet. And we made everybody wear these white gloves, and we hired students to walk around telling people to be quiet. So it was like trying to get people to kind of buy into this, participate in creating this really quiet atmosphere. So as much as we could, we tried to document every event, and in every case, economy and speed became a huge part of the production of any kind of publication we made. So in this case, I had already actually moved to San Francisco at this time, so I was down in LA for 2 days, and we basically like drove around the whole city and picked up all these books and then displayed them for 3 hours and then packed them away and then had to return them the next day. So we basically had about 5 hours to come up with some kind of way to document the show. So the process we came up with was to create a sort of bibliographic list that would function as the cover of a catalog. So anyone could sort of look up any book and find it. And the interior of the book became this sort of Frankenstein of all the books together. We did this thing where we would photocopy page 1 of book 1, page 2 of book 2, page 3 of book 3, and just repeat that over and over again. So the book would be this sort of Frankenstein combination of all the different books together. So they actually have page numbers, but they're from all the different books. So in 2010 was when the format of the exhibition really changed for me. I was given the opportunity by the Wadis to curate a show at a much larger level with a real gallery and a real budget, and it would stay up for a matter of months instead of hours. I organized this exhibition called The Way Beyond Art, Wide White Space, which was an exhibition about graphic design in the context of exhibitions. So my early motivation for doing this show was totally selfish in a way. It was an exhibition about what I do, so it was a really interesting opportunity to sort of research and look into the really great work that's being created in what I think is a super fertile arena for graphic designers to practice. The exhibition would focus in particular on graphic designers who created work in the following 3 areas: identities for exhibiting institutions, designers who forge unique collaborations with curators and artists, and also designers who launched their own exhibition-based initiatives. So overall, the exhibition had this sort of progression. The first, the Wadis has 5 spaces within the single gallery, and the first 2 galleries would feature work that you might recognize as traditional graphic design, like identities or books and things like that. While you get to the later galleries, we start to sort of question those preconceptions. You see graphic design that looks a bit strange or unfamiliar. So this is the final gallery, which really questioned what graphic design should look like in an exhibition context. The room was actually a meta exhibition about exhibitions, so it held many fragments of previous graphic design exhibitions together, and upon entering the space, the divisions aren't very obvious, but we had this long center vitrine that held all the documentation, catalogs, or gallery flyers from the exhibition, and as you sort of looked at it, you can kind of separate and start to contextualize each fragment. So a year later, I was asked by the 25th Graphic Design Biennial in Brno to curate another large-scale exhibition that would be next in a series of regionally based exhibitions titled Work from California. So in previous biennials, they had like work from Holland or work from Switzerland, and so I did work from California. And for me, the goal of this show was to create an exhibition that might function as a portrait of California through the lens of graphic design. The exhibition examined the fascination that graphic designers have with California culture, as well as revealing something of the context, attitudes, and history of the place where the work was made. So instead of organizing an exhibition, collecting great work by great California designers, I selected designers who worked in California, but the work had to be about California. So as you walked through this show, you almost got almost a tour or education about California as a place. And this strategy was really helpful in a few ways. I think it was interesting because the exhibition was not in California. It was in Brno, where quite a few people that visited the show had never been to California, but kind of knew about it through popular culture, through mainly through popular culture, but it was interesting to sort of play with the idea, the California cliches and preconceptions people had about this place where I live. I'm not going to go into the details of the exhibition, but maybe talk about one single sort of interesting experiment that happened during the process. So there was a point early on in the show that I became a bit overwhelmed with all the responsibilities of organizing something so big. I wanted to curate the show, design the exhibition, write and edit the text for the catalog, and at some point I questioned whether I could handle doing all these things, and I finally came to the idea that it might be interesting to start outsourcing the graphic design to people in the show. So in this case, I actually commissioned Ed Fella to create the exhibition logotype, and this is what Ed sent me in the mail. He actually did like 9 different versions, which I thought was incredible because I would have taken anything he's done. The guy's amazing. So he sent me these, you know, he works in this really old school commercial art way, you know, pasting things up. He doesn't use a waxer anymore, but he uses like glue and tape and stuff like that. And I initially envisioned this thing as a giant like Ed Fella vinyl, because I've always done sort of these big vinyl installations. But as I saw these paste ups, I thought, you know, it'd be really, and also the paste up was really interesting because he had to deal with this sort of bilingual problem, and he created this really strange sort of composition that dealt with like how to, you know, he thought I would scan this in and then like Photoshop in the C and the A and make 2 different versions. And I thought it was a really interesting solution to this sort of bilingual title. So I actually framed the paste up and used it as a piece in the show. So it was kind of an interesting idea of kind of having a piece in the show that doubled as the signage. So this is the catalog. I did a sunny version and an ocean version, so you could pick which one you liked. From the beginning, I had this idea of the gradient as an element in the show, this idea of the tie-dye or the rainbow, the blending of colors, beautiful sunsets that have so many abstract but positive associations with California. And I decided to use this technique that many of you probably have tried called split fountain for all the supplemental exhibition materials. So here's an image of a press set up to do split fountain. This isn't the actual press that I printed on, but it just gives you idea of how it's done. There's 3 different inks in the inkwell separated by these little stoppers, and the ink mixes organically on the press as the print job runs, and hypothetically the first print will be different from the last print depending on how the ink mixes together. So there was a bit of chance involved, especially when printing a book where you're printing these big forms, and you couldn't really tell where the colors were going to land or where the gradients were going to happen. So I had the book actually trimmed then bound to create this sort of fanned edge that kind of creates this little rainbow effect on the edge of the book. And here's the animation that kind of shows how the split fountain sort of like played out during the course of the book as you flip through it as an object. Okay, so this is All Possible Futures, the most recent exhibition I curated a few years ago as a curatorial resident at Soma Arts, a gallery in San Francisco. But first, a little bit of background about this. Before All Possible Futures was an exhibition, it was actually an article that I wrote for a self-published journal called Task Newsletter in 2007. And this issue revolved around the subject of mundane science fiction, a subgenre of science fiction which proposes that stories should not rely on impossible ideas like light speed, teleportation, and alien life, and things like that. And a mundane science fiction story must rely on ideas that are plausible to some degree. So the tension between fiction and near future realities led me to contribute a set of interviews which dealt with unrealized graphic design projects. So the premise of this article actually came from this piece that I discovered in 2003 when I was having dinner with the designer Peter Bielak when I was doing my internship in Holland. And he had just come from a bunch of client meetings and told me about several projects he was really excited about, but were unfortunately rejected. So this was a proposal we made for a Dutch agriculture ministry called Het Naturalket. And the ministry informs people about endangered species of animals and provides information from a large database about flora and fauna. So what Peter proposed was that the database be their identity. And basically, he proposed to combine the database with an electronic address book, and so every bit of correspondence that went out would read the zip code of where they were sending it and print out a list on the envelope that would tell you the flora and fauna that were in your square kilometer. So this is a sort of visualization of that. So in many ways, this proposal was a radical questioning of many accepted rules regarding graphic identity. There was no standard recognizable mark, like a distinctive logo of any kind, and the identity was in fact sort of boring. Like it just was this list, one typeface, just in black, super minimal, and maybe the most undermining thing about it was that this technology for some kind of automated database-driven identity hadn't existed before. So at the time, this conversation was both really fascinating and troubling to me. I was fascinated because Peter was not allowing like technological limitations to interrupt his proposals. So instead of offering the client a pragmatic solution, he was in fact like inventing another problem, like a speculation of what an identity could be. And it was troubling in that, this proposal, which might have broken new conceptual ground in the context of graphic identities, would never be seen by anybody and thus never be discussed by graphic designers anyway. So I began to catalog a bunch of these conversations I had with friends and colleagues and started to wonder if, what if all these explorations that were sort of built on speculation and uncertain ground would be made visible in some way and critically discussed. So this article was sort of this offering to graphic design to sort of discuss these projects that nobody had really seen. So these are the other projects in the article. I think another one that I like to use an example, a sort of this reference is going to date me, but it's sort of this Back to the Future kind of thing, was this OK Store Identity by Jeff Keedy, a designer in California, that he created in 2002. And it's a keypad generated identity that you can create different patterns and texture variations with. And Jeff said, OK is this design store in Melrose. And Jeff said the client hated it so much, they just picked the circle with the sans serif OK in the middle and told them it was such a hassle to use and they would never ever try it. And, and then in 2007, voila, like, it kind of looks like a basic version of the Walker identity, which emerged in 2007 with incredible acclaim, and rightly so. It was a really big breakthrough in the area of graphic identities. But I sort of bring this up because it makes me think about how many times a really good idea must be proposed before somebody actually executes it, and there must be so many stories like this floating around in our world. It kind of reminds me, like, again, of this Back to the Future thing where, Michael J. and some people might not know this reference unless they're over 40, but Michael J. Fox is playing Johnny Be Good at the prom that his parents are at, and he starts doing all this like heavy metal dance moves, like going on his back, and everybody's looking at him like he's a freak, and he says, "You guys aren't ready for this yet, but your kids are gonna love it." So it makes me think of that a little. So actually the initial proposal that I made to the gallery was to sort of expand this article in a much larger exhibition of unrealized and speculative work. The problem was finding the work was very difficult. I would have to, talk to people for months on end, asking them to sort of dig up all these old projects that were never realized. And by the time you go through all this, you find very little. So I really came to the realization that I had to sort of expand this definition to create a real exhibition and sort of broadening this definition of speculative graphic design. So in my effort to do this, I began to categorize the work in 4 different areas: unrealized projects that were proposed to clients but were rejected and never made, provocational, critical, or discursive work, formal experimentation created in parallel with client-based projects, and unique practices where commissions were tackled with a high level of autonomy and critical investigation. So the work in the show highlights different levels of visibility and publicness within the graphic design process. Some projects were made for clients and exist in the real world, while others might go unnoticed: failed proposals, experiments, sketches, and incomplete thoughts. These projects here might go under the category of experimental work created in parallel with client-based projects. These are designers basically creating their own tools. On the left is a project called PenJet by John Everett, Julian Hagen, and Daniel Marteveld, who were students at the Rietveld Academy, and they basically hacked a inkjet printer and adhered like felt tip pens to the ink head, and kind of created this new tool for creating imagery and typography. In the center there is a French designer named Carl Navrat, who created these really beautiful circular templates to create graphics for record covers. And on the right there, I know it's quite far in distance, but is a set of posters called 21 Bots by a studio called Catalogue that used toothbrushes, batteries, and LED lights to create a swarm of little robots that they let loose on top of a silkscreen printing screen that exposed the emulsion to UV light and kind of drew a picture of a swarm, and then they printed it. These are things that have been exhibited at the Walker, like Jörg Lenny's Victor. This is a San Francisco designer named Jeremy Mendy, who created this sort of multimedia experience. An interesting thing that happened at this exhibition is that the gallery became kind of a laboratory. People like Jörg and Jeremy actually never get to install these things and actually work on them. Like Jörg, gets to spend only a matter of weeks with Victor and actually try to improve it in some way. So I kind of gave these guys license to treat this almost as a residency, and during the month that the exhibition was going on, Jörg was there every day kind of working on drawing and redrawing with Victor and sort of improving its performance in some way. We also had a really robust program where we did lectures using Victor. People in the exhibition came and did little walkthroughs, and we had a book release and things like that. A few of the pieces in the show were also generative and literally grew during the course of the exhibition. This is a fungus piece by the Dutch studio Moniker, which I heard that here at the Walker they actually did this maybe last week. So this is the result of this sort of fungus piece. I'm going to just click through some of these slides and focus on a certain thing. This is a piece by Martin Vanevski. It's a wall collage that's basically a recreation of his studio wall, where he's constantly sort of creating these large-scale collages using discarded experiments from various projects. I'll talk about this. This is that image on the left is actually a piece by Sulky and Min, who spoke here a few weeks ago. It's called Book of Chances. It's actually a monograph of their work that's separated into CMYK, and they created this code that combines and recombines one layer in either C, M, Y, or K of different pieces together, and infinitely creates like these different compositions. This is a piece by Abake called The Victorian Alfred Museum, and it's a parasitic museum. It's basically a show within a show. The other component of the piece is this plaque that I had to place outside the gallery, which transforms any building into the Victoria Alfred Museum. It's basically a critical piece that asks what constitutes a museum. Do you need a big, fancy building, or can you simply use the tools of designs like leaflets, things like that, to sort of acquire pieces owned by other institutions, even objects which only exist in the world of fiction and literature? So they basically create this flyer that also sort of designate pieces in the exhibition as well. And the idea being that the collection can exist both inside and outside the gallery. And this particular version that they've made reflects on relatively large objects in size or story being sent from one point to another. So if you look at this vitrine, you'll see a few things like the model of the fallen Saddam Hussein statue, the Starman DVD engraved with images from the Golden Record, and a statue of the Statue of Liberty, the Cleopatra Needle, etc. So this circles back finally to this portion of the exhibition that I called the Unrealized Archive, that was actually the pieces that were included in that original article. So with every exhibition I've made, I've created an accompanying book that I conceptualize, edit, commission, writing, and design. And this type of documentation is super important to me, since the audience for these projects are really, really small, and a lot of times these exhibitions are only up for about a month, and the book is the only way to sort of keep the conversation going and sort of continue dialogue around these subjects that I'm really interested in talking about. This book, one of the main concepts that it had 9 sort of alternate covers and titles. This is just some of the interior of the book. I'll end this exhibition by talking about a really unfortunate incident that happened on the last week of the show. So I got a call from the gallery saying that a piece of the Abaki project had been stolen. So a gallery sitter was walking around and noticed that the pile of burnt fake $100 bills all of a sudden was missing. Did you guys see that? So this terrified me. I've never experienced anything like this. I looked at the surveillance video only to find out that basically the surveillance video stopped like a foot away from the vitrine, so I could not see what happened. And you know, I was terrified. I would have to call Abake and tell them that their fake $100 bills were stolen, and I was really expecting the worst. But when I told them, their response was really interesting. They asked me to call the police and have them do an investigation. So I called the police, and surprisingly enough, this is like the first time I've ever called the police that they actually showed up within like half an hour. And they came and they dusted for fingerprints on top of the vitrine and did all this work. So they asked me to get a police report, place it in the vitrine in the place where the $100 bills used to be. So I did that. And finally, they asked that I create a fake surveillance video of someone stealing the police report.
We have a non-plan. All we do is show that we still exist. We are the opposite of blind. We have absolutely nothing left but our vision. Economies liquefied. It seemed as if their material basis dissolved. Wealth became an airplane rooted around the world. Value became a global architecture.
It's pretty hard to open that vitrine.
The name of the perpetrator of this crime is technology.
Okay. Here's the last sort of self-generated project that I'm going to talk about, and something I recently finished and am really proud of. It's not really even my project, but I was really honored to participate in it. It's the new monograph for the well-known Dutch design studio Experimental Jet Set called Statement and Counterstatement. And this book is definitely not a traditional monograph, although it does include essays and images of their work. They asked me if I would read every interview, lecture, or piece of writing they'd ever produce and create and edit a glossary of terms that reflect their practice. So they literally sent over 60 or 70 Word documents and PDFs that I read over a 6-month period, sort of extracting appropriate terms and fragments of their writing to create this glossary. And in the end, what I found most interesting about this, that in their 16-year life as a studio, they deal with a lot of subjects continuously, and they these ideas sort of evolve over time. So what I decided to do is to create multiple entries of terms that they use a lot, like modernism or Wim Crowell or Helvetica. And you can kind of, and these are all dated chronologically, and you can kind of see their ideas sort of evolving over time. For example, in 2003, they talk about Helvetica, how much they love this typeface. It's so useful for all their work. And then they end in the 2004 entry saying, you know, we actually hate Helvetica, or better, we just like how this typeface has come to define us as a design studio that always uses Helvetica. And I don't think they really hate Helvetica, but I think they were a bit grow weary of people asking them about it. Okay, finally, teaching. So surprise, surprise, I ended up teaching a lot of exhibition design in some form or fashion for the last 5 years or so. And this primarily started with Wide White Space, where I created a course to go along with the exhibition. that I initially taught with two curators, Jens Hoffman and Claire Fitzsimmons from the Wadis. And the idea was, with that exhibition, I asked 4 designers in the show to send an additional FedEx box of work that they didn't show in the exhibition. And this would be used for student groups to curate smaller solo satellite exhibitions around the school. The main objective of the course was to investigate exhibition making as an explorative format for graphic designers and kind of rethink alternative ways of how we show graphic design. So this was one of the first shows that was experimental jet set, actually, and it was called The Making of, and they sent this really nice box full of books and really nice printed material, but the students decided not to show any of it. Instead, they created a 3-channel video that sort of, they made a film about 3 sort of headless designers like creating their own exhibition. So it was like a kind of different way of showing the work. This is the second one, called Metadata of the Studio Project projects. I'm just going to flip through some of these things because there's so many. This is followed by about 3 years where I actually ran basically an exhibitions program in the graphic design studio at CCA. And I would, at the beginning of the semester, I'd basically select 4 subjects, and students would curate a series of exhibitions that would go throughout the semester in kind of an unconventional format for a course. Each group would have different deadlines, different sort of deliverables, and they were all required to organize a public event around their exhibition, like a lecture or a tour, an artist talk. I was really interested in the history of the school. I would often look for existing archives that were buried in the library. This was an exhibition about the 15-year history of type design at CCA. This was another sort of historical one. It was about the Wolfgang Lederer, who was the guy in the 50s who founded the graphic design program. There was like this really big manila folder full of his stuff in the library that I found that the students use as sort of a foundation for the exhibition. This is the last one we did a few years ago. It was titled Martin Vanevski Unfinished Work. And if you guys know Martin Vanevski's work, you'll see that there isn't any of it in the show. Actually, any of the finished work. So after students did studio visits with Martin, they kind of discovered these paper collages that Martin does in the process of creating like a poster. He makes these really ornate and sort of super complex paper sculptures with tape and cut paper and letters that he photocopies, and they're really beautiful and kind of dimensional. And the students were sort of more interested in that than his sort of finished work. So the exhibition became about showing all this unfinished work that Martin does. And finally, I think what's followed that has probably been the most challenging design question of my career, chairing the MFA design program at CCA, which I've done now for 1.5 years now. Speaking of worlds colliding, we run a transdisciplinary MFA program that accepts designers from 3 disciplines: graphic design, industrial design, and interaction design. And we put them together in one space under a single curriculum and sort of challenge them to interrogate disciplinary boundaries and create a range of work from really pragmatic solutions for real-world problems to speculative projects dealing with emerging technologies and contemporary culture. So basically, we set up this open laboratory for students to expand the parameters of their disciplines and create new work and even new practices sometimes. So this is just some images of our studio. And since this is mainly a graphic design audience, I'll kind of speak through that lens for a little bit and say that, you know, our students still do make things like posters or books, sort of standard graphic design formats, but just through proximity and through the cross-disciplinary curriculum, students are really influenced by the other disciplines and create sometimes some really strange work by traditional graphic design standards, really sort of leveraging different new technologies and things like that. This is a piece by a student named William Bottini, which he actually hacked into his digital camera and created this. He calls it a patch that sort of samples a line of pixels down the center of the image. So when he takes a photo of something moving, it basically takes a photo of a line of pixels and it repeats it over and over and over again and sort of combines it into this this landscape and creates a full image. So this is a picture that he's created by shooting a picture of a wave at the beach. And it kind of creates this strange sense of reality. This is a student named Lindsay Wu who is asked to create a template to create graphic form. These are some studies that she did. This is a student named Prari who's investigating how food and food objects can be used as material for communication and experience design. So she's created like a 5-course sort of 5-course meal, kind of creating tableware to sort of create an experience. So these are all graphic designers sort of breaking into using 3D and different tools. This is a student named Alejandra who was really interested in working in 3D and kind of used the tools of a graphic designer to explore creating furniture. She was really interested in creating chairs. So she, in a way, she intentionally sort of misunderstands 2D visualizations of 3D. She was working a lot with isometric drawings and kind of misunderstanding how you might make them dimensional, and created these really strange sculptural chairs. This is actually an interaction designer named Christina Gaitan who was sort of focusing on examining water systems as a typology of natural systems, seeking to make invisible systems legible at some human scale. So she's made these sort of contraptions that kind of bring to light sort of the problem we're having with water in the West Coast. We've kind of gone through this 2-year drought just now. This is an ID student named Rafi who has created a series of seating objects or chairs revolving around the idea of presentness. So he poses the question, how can an object be designed to facilitate and enhance presentness by the user? So on the left, he actually harvested this log from Muir Woods in the Bay Area, and as this seating object dries, it begins to split, and he's created these brass butterflies that continuously repair and at the same time decorate the object, making the user kind of a steward to that object and continuously aware of times, aware that time happens on the object. I'll finish off by showing, circling back to exhibitions and showing our end of year exhibition from last year. This course, this is actually a result of a course taught by a curator named David Kasperzak, and it's sort of meant to explore and interrogate how we show design in exhibition context as well. David and the students always have a huge challenge. We use our classrooms as the exhibition space, and they really have to create an exhibition architecture that really transforms the space into something like a gallery. So what I really love about this program is that there's a really healthy and productive instability in it. There are constant conversations between the disciplines from both student and faculty, and the processes and methods you're comfortable with are always being expanded and tested by this conversation. And I have a really deep interest in fostering this dialogue between the different disciplines, being that for many years I've sort of struggled to carve out a space for myself to work in the area of curatorial practice and exhibition making. And I think it's really interesting, the sharing and dialogue that you can have between disciplines. And I've really learned a lot from working with curators and artists through the years. And I think that kind of space, creating that kind of space for students has been really fulfilling and also a big challenge. So I'm continuously working on this, and it's really inspired my practice as well. So thanks a lot. So Q&A, huh? Yeah.
seeing a vacuum. I'm filling it. John, can you talk about your curatorial work as a form of scholarship? Actually, you have a role as a faculty member at the California College of Art, and you're engaged in this practice. But can you put it in sort of a scholarly context?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I don't think of it through that lens at all, to be honest. I think of it. Yeah, I don't think of it through that lens at all. I really think of it as something I'm interested in and something that's a new challenge for me as a graphic designer. And I don't think of it in those sort of terms at all. I think I'm really interested in exploring these subjects and creating dialogue. I think I've been sort of criticized in my exhibitions for including things in my show that almost criticize the subject of the show itself, but I actually really like that. Sometimes I commission designers to make new work, and the new work they make in a sense sort of is a critique of the exhibition itself, and I think that's interesting. I'm really interested in creating a space for designers to have a conversation about different subjects that I'm interested in. I end up producing books and commissioning essays and doing all the things that I guess scholarship requires, but I don't think of it through that lens at all. I kind of think of it through a making lens, I would say. Sorry, that's a sort of disappointing answer, I guess.
Good answer, John.
There's a hand there.
Thank you so much. I guess as a student, I want to ask, so now is we're MFA student as in MCAD, but the question is, it's kind of a little bit confused. We're towards to commercial art or fine art or somewhere between. So which is when we learning as graphic design areas. So you're the professional artist and also be a professor in MFA program too. That's kind of we want to know from you, maybe a personal opinion.
Can you say it again?
We have commercial design,
Uh-huh.
fine art, graphic design. So, or what we focus on more, or kind of between.
What you should focus on, or what I focus on?
What we should focus on as
I think you should focus on whatever you want.
But the question is like the realistic, like we have to find a job later.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think. You can. Yeah, you can. The reality is, yes, you have to make a living. But I think there's lots of ways to make a living. And I think one of the ways is to get a job working for somebody else. The other way is to work for yourself and teach. There's a lot of different models. I think I always knew I wanted to do this model where I would work for myself and teach to support that practice. I think it's a personal choice. I think there's a lot more options than you might think at this moment. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. There's a question there.
Hi. In the beginning, you talked about your minimalism being like a lack of time. You like to put these constraints.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could talk more about your conceptual framework and the restrictions you apply to yourself and how you go about with that minimalism, just beyond a lack of time.
Yeah, that's it was sort of a joke in a way. I don't have a lot of, my life has changed a lot in the last 5 years. Having kids and stuff, you don't I used to work like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you had all this time to, work on endless iterations and do all this stuff. And that kind of time now, especially now chairing a program, is sort of eliminated. Yet I still want to maintain a creative practice, and so and all this time, I think I've developed a more systematic approach to making things. Like I showed a bunch of examples of work where I use the printing process or some kind of methodology to sort of generate form, and it almost generates on its own without me having to sort of like subjectively push things around on a composition. And I really like that kind of process. And I think over the years I've found ways to leverage that way of working, and it's quite fast. So it also sort of surprises me when you work really quickly and it isn't about sort of like small clicks moving compositions around. It's about like generating like a flag generator that makes like hundreds of things really, really quickly. I like that, and the things that I generate are things that I might not normally make if I was doing it sort of in a really like subjective, like one by one kind of way. Yeah, so I guess it's a process that I enjoy, but it's also been enhanced by the fact that I continuously lose time, and so I'm forced to sort of perpetuate this process that I already enjoy doing. And I also think of all these projects as sort of continuous projects. Like I think of the Latin America project as a continuation of the California project. I feel like that's almost part 2 of that project, and then I think I have a lot of projects like that where I think of a project as a continuous project that I do over and over and over again over like 10 years. Yeah. There's a hand there.
Hi. Okay. My question is, do you participate in Tumblr, and what's your opinion of like image aggregators or blogs?
I don't do Tumblr. I just started doing what do you call it? Where's my phone? Instagram, like about 6 months ago. I don't do a lot of that stuff. I should, though. I should do it more. Yeah, I haven't updated my website for about 6 years. That's how bad the state I'm in right now. I'm interested in these things. Sometimes I'm kind of staying above water with the things I'm already doing, that I don't have time to start new things. But do you have anything in particular about that you want to ask besides?
Well, I've seen some of the things that you showed, I saw on Tumblr, but I didn't really I wasn't able to like get deeper, and yeah, I'm just curious.
Things that images of my work?
Yeah, like the covers for All Possible Futures, for example.
Oh. There's a website for it that explains. The exhibition has a website that kind of goes into more depth about the show and kind of shows, a greater context.
But I guess the question is more like, what is your opinion on
about Tumblr?
About Tumblr and how I find students like. I use it for inspiration, and students use it for inspiration, but oftentimes it becomes like a kind of a mindless tool and more about surface.
The idea that you can look up a lot of imagery about design really easily. Yeah, sure, I think it's problematic in that you don't really understand the full context about what you're looking at, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong with looking at form, to me. Like I think that's great if you like looking at design. I don't see any problem of looking at design as long as you want, or as much as you want. Sure. It's I think when I was a student, I think I did this really nerdy exercise for a long time where I would pick out different posters that I was interested in and force myself to look at them harder. And sort of, I would have a Post-it and I would sort of write down what the poster itself was communicating to me, sort of break down like everything from the imagery to the typography and really like analyze it. But this is sort of in like the year 2000 when I didn't even look at the internet, you know? Because now it's so easy to sort of just look through like dozens and dozens of images really, really quickly without really looking hard at it. And I think there's something to, especially when as a student, to sort of reading work and spending time like looking at it with some depth. So in that case, yeah, sure, the internet's really difficult that way. Sometimes you can barely get an image that you can see close enough to even see what the type says, you know? So I think it's great to be able to get some context or understand what the thing you're looking at was meant for in some way. So that's maybe my attitude about it.
Yeah, we have another one.
Okay.
John, I was wondering if you could speak, you've already touched on this a little bit when you mentioned that you taught to support your self-initiated work.
Mm-hmm.
But could you speak a little bit more to how those worlds actually came to collide, all three of them? Like, did you take conscious steps or did it kind of happen organically over time?
It just happened over time. I mean, I've been teaching for 13, 14 years and yeah, I mean, I think the classroom can be a really interesting laboratory for like exploring your ideas through projects that you, do with students. I think over time, people recognize sort of your abilities as a designer and kind of, ask you to teach things that you do in your own practice. And so over time, those things kind of naturally kind of come together. I think at CCA, for some reason, it all came together in a really, really quickly for me because I got this job there being the director of design at the Wadis, and I was teaching there as well. And then I started proposing classes that were collaborations with the Wadis. So it was almost like I was doing work for the school and also teaching at the school. And so it all was at the school. But it's kind of a unique situation because I think I'm the only designer who actually had a full-time job working for the school. That wasn't the in-house designer for like the communications office, yeah, and who was teaching there at the same time. So yeah, I think it was a really unique situation and a fortunate situation, and made it all happen quicker. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Yeah.
Thanks.
There's one up there.
As a curator, I was wondering if you, do you ever see any element of like trend spotting in that? And not trend as a dirty word, but as just like design trends or visual trends or anything that, comes from the experimental and then maybe bleeds into the commercial work.
Do I see that during the process or what do you mean?
Do you see that in your role to sort of spot either trends or like patterns and new ideas as opposed to some of the recycled ideas that we often see in design? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't think about it like that really about spotting trends really. Although I have to say, like, to be self-critical, sometimes I look back at the wide white space and think that list is really, really obvious of designers that I selected, because since that time they've been sort of in other exhibitions, and it's a really it's a group of really great designers, and they've obviously been selected to be in all these other things and are super visible. So when you look back on the selection, you think maybe it was like kind of an obvious selection. I think I've made efforts to kind of do the opposite, where to find. I don't ever use the word trend for anything, so I've been trying to grapple with how to think about it, really. But I think, for example, like in that California show, I think I saw that danger of it becoming this arbitrary group of great work made by great California designers, and I kind of wanted to sort of turn that upside down by, having the work have to be about California, so it kind of forced me to look elsewhere than those obvious places, and therefore I kind of included one student that had just graduated from CCA, and several younger designers who were a lot less known at that time because they had been doing work about California. So I kind of intentionally maybe created a criteria that forced me to look in different places that I might not normally not look, to sort of get away from selecting maybe an obvious or trendy list of designers.
Thanks.
Yeah. There's one there.
So you showed us examples of commercial work and personal work you've done. Do you ever find yourself refraining from personal ideas in commercial work in order to kind of save that for personal exploration, or would you tend to put those ideas into the commercial work?
I mean, I try to put those ideas as much as possible into the work. I think I look at a lot of things as commentary. Like I think of like the Latin American show, for example. Like that whole idea it kind of emerged as almost a critique on like the nationality of like the different participants. How you have these like regional shows that are based in these particular countries, but then if you read the bio really carefully, some of these people have hardly work in those countries or are working other places, and that kind of idea was kind of like a really personal kind of lens upon the people in the show, and kind of wanted to sort of question that idea of identity and nationality within the participants. And I don't tell people, I don't really present it in that way sometimes, because I think the ambiguity of it is actually more powerful. But it sort of fueled the way I thought about making that work, if that makes sense. So I try to infuse as much of that lens, my own sort of personal lens, into my ideas and how I make the work. There's one way up there.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm wondering if there are any other worlds that are colliding with design that you're interested in and paying attention to or thinking of incorporating soon.
Well, I was just telling at dinner, I was we were talking about food. Well, at dinner we were talking about food. But I'm teaching a class this semester called The Future of Food. And I don't really know much about food, but I found a collaborator in this designer named Monica Martinez, who uses food as a material in her work. And at our program, we have these courses that are co-taught by designers from different disciplines, and I find that I mean, even though I don't work with that material, I found that subject to be really interesting, especially in the Bay Area. And we've kind of created a curriculum around sort of investigating food as a subject and food as a material for design. I think you can kind of look at almost anything through the lens of design and kind of think about sort of integrating that world into design in a way. And I think that's what's been kind of interesting about chairing this program, in that it's again these three different disciplines kind of colliding and coming together, and it kind of opens up possibilities for all different kinds of worlds to sort of be included, and students end up sometimes doing things that I don't expect or that are quite strange coming out of a design school. So I'm really fascinated by the possibilities of other worlds kind of intersecting design. So I'm interested in it. I can't say that I have a particular thing that I can tell you tonight or anything like that, but it's something that I'm thinking about, and especially in our program, is sort of integrating that idea into the curriculum. That's it. Okay, thanks.